Support for WPR comes from Driftless Music Gardens with Bonfire Music and Arts Festival, June 12th through the 14th in Yuba, including Heatbox and People Brothers Band. Full lineup at driftlessmusicgardens.com.
Support for Wisconsin Public Radio comes from Wollersheim Winery, Distillery and Bistro, where Wisconsin wine and spirits are all made on-site, open year-round. More information and store hours are available at wollersheim.com.
Great to have you with us here on WPR News. Larry Mealer here. You know, it's always fun to talk about birds, especially with our next guest, Bill Volkert. He's a retired wildlife DNR educator and naturalist, worked at the Horican Marsh for 27 years, written a number of books, and has led, he probably doesn't even know how many bird watching tours and given talks to so many groups. He's also written a number of books, and it's great to have him back to talk about the birds that you and I will be enjoying seeing and hearing, and already are. And maybe you need some help identifying a bird, or maybe you've had an experience you want to share regarding a specific bird or birds. I hope you'll join the conversation today. Easy to reach us. The number to call is 800-642-1234. 800-642-1234, or you can send an email or even a photo. If you've got a bird maybe you want to identify, or maybe an unusual bird photo, you can do that. Go to talk@wpr.org. That's talk@wpr.org. Bill Volkert, good to have you back. Thanks for joining in today.
Well, it's great to be back. Thank you.
Well, we got spring migration going on. It's in full swing, and so, you know, lots of birds are traveling thousands of miles to get back to the same location every year, most often. And I think this may be the best time to be a birder.
I think it's exciting for anyone who enjoys birds to whatever degree. Just to see them coming back again each year, it's, to me, one of the great ways to gauge the progress of spring. I mean, sure, we got warmer temperatures, the leaves are coming out more, so there's a lot of different things that we'll look for, the various wildflowers that appear through the season. But this sequential arrival of birds, to me, is just one of the most vivid ways of watching that whole season unfold as these birds are coming back, many of them to nest right here in Wisconsin, others just stopping over and continuing even further north.
Yeah, it's millions of birds. And how many, there's got to be, 300 species, something like that?
For Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin?
Yeah, of regular occurrence, 300 to 320. I mean, some of these are every year, the same ones are coming. Others are a little less frequent. Their range is just outside of Wisconsin. And then there's always those that just get off course and get lost. Our total list of Wisconsin birds is around 442, I think. So we're always add something that gets, way off course and shows up totally unexpectedly. For myself, my interest is more of those birds that belong here and regularly show up and depend on this, rather than the accidental one. Those are curiosities. It's always interesting to keep tabs of that, and it's nice to see that birders are out there watching carefully and making note of it and sharing those sightings. But I think it's much more important for the birds that come here and hopefully are successful in rearing a family, maintaining their populations.
So really, what brings them here?
Well, if you take a look just at a world map, you're going to see that the landmass of Central America and that northeastern part of South America is a much smaller area than, say, the United States and Canada. And same thing with Europe and Asia. The tropics make up a relatively small area, but the vast majority of our migrant birds are insectivores. So it's not the cold weather that drives the migration, but the cold weather wipes out the food supply. And so for a whole variety of birds, they've got to head south. And so they're just simply escaping our harsh weather, and especially that food shortage during that time. They don't breed in the tropics because there's just not enough elbow room down there. And if they want to raise a family, they're pretty well crowded in there during our winter. So now when that population is going to explode, the resident birds of the tropics, they need room to raise a family. So if those birds, the migrants, depart, and we've got all this land mass, which is seasonally available. So we've got all the habitat, we've got all that food and space for them. They come up here, exploit that, take advantage of it, and then retreat again before the weather turns on them and the food runs out. And that's the amazing that these birds are moving with the seasons, literally thousands of miles, and coming back time and again. And we just see that sort of progress of the seasons. Birds come back, raise a family, turn around, and head back south again.
I think it's pretty cool how it works that the birds that are staying in the South, suddenly they have room to have their own birds, their own young.
Yep.
It's pretty cool.
And if you think about it, I mean, this is probably a little bit idealized, but robins will have two clutches, two families in the summer, so two clutches of eggs. And let's say that they all survive. You've got 4 eggs on average per nest. So now that pair of robins, 2 birds, becomes a family of 10. Now that's of course assuming that everybody's going to survive, but that's a tremendous demand on the food supply. And so there's just not that room in the tropics. Tropical birds, by the way, have much smaller families. Usually it's just two eggs that they'll lay. But of course it's a much moderated type of climate, and so that there's a pretty good chance for them to raise just those few and invest a lot of energy into their survivorship.
I was driving back the other day from Bayfield, and along one patch of road, I wasn't going fast, and I spied a duck, and then I saw the little one, and so I slowed way down, and I was kind of watching, almost came to a stop. The mom was just trying to get that little one across the road. It was pretty cool to watch.
They're hatching out right now. So the waterfowl are early migrants. They're coming as soon as that ice recedes Wisconsin. This is at least when they can arrive in Wisconsin. And then as the ice opens up further north, those migrants will move on and the local birds will start to nest. So our mallards, our blue-winged teal, wood ducks, those are some of the more common nesting birds in throughout Wisconsin. And so they'll start fairly early in the nesting and laying the eggs. For most of our ducks, 21 to 24, maybe 25 days is average incubation, so just shy of a month's time. So right now they're hatching out as we're getting toward the end of May, early June. So they're starting already in late April, early May to begin nesting. In northern Wisconsin, it's a little bit more delayed. And so, of course, we're probably behind about a week to 2 weeks, depending on what part of the state we're at and the kinds of conditions.
Marianne in Poynette has a question for us. Let's go there. Hi,
right.
Marianne.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm super excited because I've been trying to figure out what this bird is. So the habitat is we're surrounded by farm fields, but we have 4,000 pine trees on a 5-acre area. And this bird is about the length of a crow, but it's slimmer, and its head and beak, real long beak, and it almost appears stork-like in how, there's that S curve in a stork, and it's got like a growl, like a and it's very curious about us. It has young, and it at evening it starts to come out. Any idea what that is?
The size of a crow, and you're talking about a curved neck to it, which is typical of the herons. And medium-sized heron, maybe green heron, is one possibility.
Color, like a gray or a black also. Would they be in a pine tree?
Well, they may nest up there, but they're going to be going to water for feeding. You said, but this is more open field?
We're near Schenenberg Marsh. So.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and they may nest some distance from the water, actually, because they're going to be fishing down there for the minnows and frogs and whatever else they can capture. But that's a fairly common, widespread bird, about the size of a crow. And in some ways, in flight, they oftentimes look a little crow-like, except you'll notice that swelling of the neck as they tuck that back, and the beak is longer and thinner. And also the profile of the wings, they're a little more just arched and steady paddling, where the crows sort of have this very loose flapping and a little bit more
of their wings.
Yeah, a little more gliding from side to side. These guys seem to be a little more deliberate and direct in their flight.
Marianne, there you go. Thank you so much for calling. Appreciate it. Let's take a call from Rick in Portage County. Hi, Rick.
Hey, hi, Larry. Thanks for taking my call. Good morning. And I in southeast Portage County, and when I moved here, we had quite a number of red-headed woodpeckers were quite common, and we had a lot of old cedar power poles in the area that are since gone, and slowly they just disappeared. Now, yesterday, after decades, my wife and I were absolutely delighted. We had a red-headed woodpecker on our suet feeder twice yesterday. And my question is do they have different habitat than all the other woodpeckers that come to our feeder?
Yeah, good question. They tend to be a bird really of sort of the forest edge, and where downy, hairy, and red-bellied pileated woodpeckers are really deep forest birds. Red-headed woodpecker was originally associated with the savannas, so a little more open, scattered trees. And so they tend to feed on the ground oftentimes, so they like to use the trees for roosting and for nesting, and then feeding in some of the semi-open areas. Red-headed woodpeckers, some of the eastern states, are listed as threatened species, so there have been declines in Wisconsin. The southeast and eastern part of the state, we've seen a decline. There's a stronghold yet in the southwest, and also some areas in the north central part of the state. Probably the best red-headed woodpecker population that I have seen is at the Necedah National Wildlife Refuge, and that's because they have intentionally been trying to do a savanna restoration, opening up some of those forests. And it's not just a small area. They've done several hundred acres, and the birds can be quite thick there. So what happens is, as a bird population declines, let's go in reverse here. Let's say we have a very healthy population.
Okay.
The prime habitat is saturated, and then these others are moving out into exploring new areas in somewhat marginal habitat or satellite areas. So you find then a real core area where they're the densest, and then they're scattered beyond that around the larger region. As a population declines, they start to retreat to that core. And that's what we're seeing with this bird is when they were quite healthy, we had a population not huge, but still scattered throughout eastern Wisconsin and other parts of the state. And now we're finding it sort of contracting a little bit to some of those prime areas in, as I mentioned, the driftless area in west central Wisconsin, and then a couple of strongholds in the north. I had one in my backyard this spring, wonderful sight. I only get them about every few years. I'll have a stopover. So again, we're sort of on that outskirts of the birds. But if hopefully we can provide some good habitat for them, keep them around, and maintain some of those satellite populations.
So I have a red-headed woodpecker I see every day. It's a wood-carved one. That's in my house, and in the kitchen, it's sitting next to a pileated woodpecker.
And no doubt one of the most striking of the woodpeckers, that brilliant red head and black and white, and that white is so intense, such a pure white. It is a beautiful bird.
It is indeed. Rick, thanks a lot for calling. Appreciate it. Bill Volkert, our guest today, retired wildlife educator. We're talking birds with him. I'm Larry Mealer. You're listening to WPR News. Having some fun talking birds and bird migration. We'll get into bird songs. We have some songs to play for you as we move along today, and you can join in. If you want to email us a photo or a question, you can do that, talk@wpr.org. Our phone lines are full. So let's go to the phones next. Tom and Nina, your turn. Hi, Tom.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I've started to recently use the Merlin ID app, in particular the sound app. How accurate is that? Because, like, for example, I'm getting a tufted titmouse in my neighborhood, and I have never seen one of those there before. I know they're in Wisconsin, and there's some other birds, too, that I've never seen before. But they get ID'd on the app. But what's your opinion on the accuracy of that app? And I'll just listen to your answer.
Well, that's a really good question. First of all, I'm glad you're using Merlin. It's a wonderful introduction for people to identifying birds by their song. First of all, I would say that it's difficult to learn birds by song, and I did it the hard way. I spent 30, 40 years. Every time I would hear something, I would chase after it, try to identify it, and then I would just turn around and try to register in my head, how am I going to remember that the next day? That's the old school of doing it. Merlin, you can just take your cell phone, hold it up, and yeah, it'll identify the birds for you. You are right that it is not foolproof, and I'm sure it's relatively new technology. It'll keep improving, no doubt, over time. But I had the very same experience, tufted titmouse, when we were doing bird surveys last summer in the northern Kettle Moraine. Myself and a good friend who were doing these surveys, we both came to the same conclusion. We do know there's a small population of tufted titmice in the area, but we were getting hits on it. I had it at 4 different locations, and I couldn't verify that bird was around, and I considered all those to be false. I also had the experience where a bird was singing behind me, and it kept telling me blue jay. It was a catbird. It was close to a blue jay voice. And then one other example, 2 years ago, the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, our statewide bird group, they keep track of all the bird sightings through the 4 seasons. And there was just an extraordinary jump in identifications of the Philadelphia vireo, and it was realized that this was misidentifying the far more common red-eyed vireo, Philadelphia being a migrant.
Sure.
So it is not foolproof. There are a few errors. I would say it's probably 90+% accurate, though. And so, yeah, I wouldn't believe every bird. You've got to check a few of those out, and there may be some errors. But again, for somebody who's not going to do it the hard way for birds, just take your cell phone, hold it up, and identify the birds in your backyard or where you're traveling. And it is an incredible tool. And it is probably 90% of the time accurate, but do be aware that there are a few errors. And as another note, we were using it last year as we were doing some bird surveys, breeding bird surveys in the Kettle Moraine. This is where I got those false hits. And we told anybody else helping on the survey, you can use Merlin as an aid. So for myself, I found it helpful because as I'm trying to count birds at a stop, at a census point, I've got 6, 8 birds singing around me all at once. You try to tune in. Okay, is it 2 cardinals here and something here and there? Well, it's hard to tune into everything, so it would prompt me that, there's a yellow warbler singing behind me. I had to listen for it and verify it. So the protocol for the survey was you can use Merlin to help you to be aware and prompt you of things, but if you cannot verify it, it remains hypothetical.
Tom, thanks a lot for calling. And I think it'd be worth it to go through this little process and of how you sort of remember birds. And Jeff's got an oven bird, for example. Let's Jeff, if you got that up, let's listen. Yeah, let's listen to an oven bird, and then you can talk about it, and then we'll listen to it again.
All right. Notice how it gets louder and louder and louder.
Yeah.
That's the rhythm we listen for, and it may have a little variation in its voice, but the little mnemonic that the bird watchers use for that is teacher, 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 teacher. So it's a 2-note, and it gets louder, 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 louder.
Let's listen to it again.
And very sharp and accented.
Yeah. Very cool.
An ovenbird is a great one to listen for because it is a member of the warbler family, and where most of our warblers are brilliantly colored, this one is brown on its back with a little speckling on the breast, and he's on the ground rather than up in the trees. Gets its name ovenbird because it makes a nest on the ground like the old ovens with a little dome and an opening door on it. In other words, a little brown bird hiding on the ground deep in the forest is a tough one to get a look at. But this is what we listened for.
Yeah.
And this was a bird that we were really censusing as one of our priority species for our Kettle Moraine breeding bird survey because we know that years ago it was a bird that we would hear much more commonly. It's still fairly common throughout northern Wisconsin, but it has declined in that southeastern part of the state in those forested areas. And we're trying to establish some good census, get some baseline. How many are there right now, relative numbers of birds? And these are the surveys that we're doing.
Let's go to Diana and Taylor next. Diana, we'll give you a chance. Thank you for calling.
Good morning. I'm in west central Wisconsin, and this morning while I was walking around outside, a large flock of probably close to 100 geese came flying over. And I know that non-nesting geese, they will move out of the area and so forth, but a flock of almost 100 this time of year, is the fires or something going on?
No. What you have is an unusual migration, which is called the molt migration. So most migration is spring and fall, birds are returning, and then they're receding again, retreating to the wintering areas. As we get into the end of May and the first few weeks of June, the Canada geese will undertake this molt migration. So let me explain a little what's going on. Canada geese do not begin to nest until they're 2 to 3 years old. The ones that remain in Wisconsin, usually at 2 years, they begin to nest, sometimes 3. In the Arctic breeding grounds, that population usually takes 3 years to mature. So you have then the adults returning with the young from last year, and the adults will start to nest, the young are just hanging out. And right now, the geese are hatching out. It's actually, usually we see that in early May already. And what happens here is all of those immature birds who are not breeding, the failed breeders, especially some of the first-time nesters that are not successful in raising any young, or those that lose a nest, they gather together. And Canada geese, like our ducks, go through what's called a complete molt. In other words, they will shed all the wing feathers at once and are incapable of flying for about 3 weeks. Where you'll see, like hawks or turkey vultures or herons, large birds you'll see overhead, you'll see a missing wing feather on each side. They're slowly replacing one at a time. They can afford to do that. They're not migrating during the summertime. They're growing new feathers, which have shown wear for them, and they can get around pretty well with a little hole in each wing because it's just local flights. Geese and ducks are fast flyers. They're easily doing 40, 50 miles an hour. They're cutting through the air, and they need that full complement of wing feathers. So at this time of year, as the young are beginning to grow up, you'll start to see, as we get especially into late June and July, they're molting. They're shedding those feathers, and if you go to some of the parks and other places where the geese have gathered, you'll see feathers all over. Yeah. So they'll be incapable of flying. They can do that at that time of year because the young are getting to be half grown, and they're not capable of flying either. So the parents can just lead them to water for safety to get away from any threats, and then bring them to the uplands for grazing and looking for their food. Well, at that time, you've got a demand on that local food supply, and nobody can fly. So you don't want competition with all these non-breeders. They depart. They're actually flying north just to shed their feathers. And so we're seeing right now, late May, usually the last week of May is when I start to see the first molt migrants. And then into June, you'll see these flocks. And if you've got flocks that are flying relatively low and honking a lot, these are still birds that are gathering up in bigger and bigger flocks. The true molt migration, you start to see them up there 500, 1,000 feet high. They're going north. They may go just to, say, northern Wisconsin or southern Canada. We actually had one bird from Wisconsin. It was a marked bird, showed up all the way on Baffin Island on the Arctic Circle. I don't think you have to go that fly just to shed your feathers, but for a Canada goose, that's not an extremely long flight either. So this is what they're doing, is they're taking pressure off of the breeding grounds and going through a molt migration. While they're capable of flying right now, they're gathering up. So these are the non-breeders, the young from last year, and failed breeders, and they're heading north and going to find a place where they can shed their feathers, find good food, and then return again later in summer.
I was thinking back a couple of years, my daughter Emily had an internship with the DNR, and I think they were doing some netting and banding of Canada geese during the molt.
Yep, that's when we actually can round up the birds because they cannot fly. It's just like cattle. You just get a group of people together with a big corral net, walk them right into there, and then we can actually capture the birds, tag them, and for whatever kinds of research projects we have. That's the best time to be able to catch a Canada goose.
Yeah, she was working on water quality in some streams, but was called into action.
Oh, sure.
With that,
I need a
she
lot of
really
hands there.
enjoyed it. She really had a great time doing that.
Oh, wonderful.
Jerry in southeast Minnesota. Your turn. Hi, Jerry.
Yes, good morning. Only simple question. How long do I keep feeding my Orioles?
Oh, I would keep that up throughout the summertime because right now we're getting a good insect hatch, especially as we get a little warm weather today, tomorrow. Be bringing out both the insects that are the beneficial ones as well as some of the pesky ones for us. But that'll be a lot of natural food. But the feeder is just a convenient quick stop, and what it does is really for us, it brings the birds where we can enjoy them. You'll see them coming right now, the adult Orioles, the first-year birds, the young males from last year, and then also they'll be bringing their young. They'll be coming less and less as you get into, say, August, and then eventually they'll depart. Of course, as it gets warmer, make sure that you're cleaning that feeder and changing that water, sugar water, a little more often when we get up into the 90s so things don't spoil for them. But I keep it up throughout the summer. Just it's not that they need it, but I enjoy watching them.
Jerry, thanks so much for calling. I don't know if you can see the photo up on our screen, but
Yes.
Melissa emailed to say they saw this bird pictured and wondered
Beautiful.
what it was. Their husband saw a leucistic robin on the other side of town. But what bird are we looking at here? It's
This is also showing a lot more white than normal. This is rose-breasted grosbeak. So on the picture, you see the very large conical beak for cracking seeds, the dark head, dark on the wing, and that rose color is just visible here by the
And the
feeder.
breast.
A nice V of red coming down the breast. Now the back should normally be much darker than this with a little white patch on the rump. But this here is you see quite a lot of white throughout the back and the tail region. This again is that leucistic, or sometimes pronounced leucistic. Some people refer to it as partial albinism. It's not, say, true albino, but it is a lack of pigment in certain feathers. So true albino is totally pure white, no pigments, pink eyes, pink fleshy parts. But here we'll get this partial albinism, as sometimes called, the leucistic birds. And the white can show up anywhere. It's usually symmetrical. I've got a red-winged blackbird that's got a little white on the feathers on each wing feather. And you'll see the amount of white is quite variable. It usually shows up more commonly in the common birds, just because there's so many of
Sure.
them. Robins, Canada geese, birds like that will start to show among that population. It's just a genetic mutation and just that roll of the dice that an individual will not produce the full normal plumage.
Lila in Soldiers Grove. It's your turn. Hi, Lila.
Hi, I'd like to say thank you to Bill for coming on the air. I always enjoy the conversation about birds.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
And I want to bring us back to a dull-colored bird on the forest floor. I'm happy to report that I'm hearing whippoorwills only when it's dark in the evening and early in the morning.
Well, good for you. What county are you in again?
Crawford County.
Crawford, okay.
Out here in the Driftless area. Sometimes I hear them in the woods up the hill and sometimes down the hill, closer to the water.
Well, I'm envious.
Yeah, me
that's another
too.
bird that has declined significantly in Wisconsin and other places in the eastern United States. Just as we were talking earlier about bird populations that tend to contract, this is a bird too. There used to be a pair or two in the northern Kettle Moraine and a few other outlying areas. Those have all disappeared, and it's that stronghold in west central Wisconsin seems to be the main spot where whippoorwills are still hanging in there. And yeah, this is a bird that we're always hoping that they're at least successful in nesting, to be able to raise their numbers and at least maintain a population, if not even show a recovery. The problem is we're not certain as to what the cause of the decline is. And this is always one of the big questions and challenges in bird conservation is, first we monitor. We do our surveys to try to get some sort of a census or get our finger on the pulse of the population numbers and trends. How are they doing? And if we start to see a decline, now the big question is, what's the cause, and is there something we can do to address it? The problem is, in a complicated world these days, for many of our birds, it seems that the decline is more than just a single factor. So we go back to bald eagle and osprey. That was easy to fix. It was DDT, and that was the problem for the birds. They were not raising young because it was interfering with the calcium metabolism. They had thin eggshells, and they couldn't raise any young. The eggs were breaking. Banned DDT. The birds came back, and we've got eagles doing extremely well now, 50-plus years after we've banned the chemical. The problem for a lot of these songbirds and other birds is that it seems to be multifaceted. It is habitat loss and less opportunity for them here in North America, the only place they nest. It is also trying to find a secure place to overwinter in the tropics. Trying to make those journeys of 2,000 to 2,500 miles between there is getting more and more dangerous. You've got tall communication towers, tall buildings, glass windows that things fly into. We've got stray cats out there. Chemicals are always a concern, but we're not sure which ones and which amount are affecting birds in what way. My normal answer these days is I believe that for a lot of our birds, it's the old D, all the above. It's a number of different impacts. The hard thing is to sort out which one is of greatest impact and which one can we address. I will put this hint out as I do on most shows for any homeowner out there. The easiest thing that we can do to save even just a few birds is to make our windows more visible. Window strikes are adding up to a very significant impact to our birds. Myself, I've got a beautiful view looking out into our woods. And when we built our house, we wanted some nice large windows, and I would have about once a month a bird hit a window. It was devastating every time I had a bird hit. You know, most people might shrug it off, go, yeah, but come on, Bill, that's only 10 or 12 a year. That's not that many. Well, I'm surrounded by almost 100 homes throughout that whole neighborhood. Now you start adding that up. And it's literally in the millions of birds. And there are a number of easy fixes to make your windows much more visible. There's more and more products coming out. The first place I would suggest starting for anyone is look at the American Bird Conservancy website, abc.org, and go to the section on avoiding window collisions. We did that at our house, and the bird collisions for the windows has gone right down to zero. It's a very simple fix. Just make them more visible. And we just did it with some little striping on there. And it's got to be about 2 to 4 inches apart. So in other words, it looks like there's a barrier that the birds can't fly through. The problem with windows is two things. You may have 2 large windows on each side that the birds can see through, figure they can slip through that. Or more likely, it's oftentimes reflection. Yeah. They're seeing a nice bright days, all those reflected leaves and sky, figure they can just fly through that, and here we have a completely unnatural barrier for them. And I know for a lot of people, well, they hit the window, I watch them for a bit, or I even put them in a little box and they flutter around and I let them go and they seem to do just fine. They may survive. They may also have suffered internal injuries and they may fly away and then die. We don't know the degree of those injuries. And just the best thing we can do is avoid those collisions in the first place. I would urge anyone who's had the experience, especially big picture windows and the large patio doors that look out and reflect that light. If you've got birds hitting that, do something to help them out. Even if it's just a few birds in your neighborhood, you're going to be doing an awful lot to contribute to survivorship, because birds certainly are in trouble. And the most devastating statistic in the last few years has been since the 1970s, we've lost a quarter of all North American birds. 3 billion birds have disappeared.
Oh, that's a horrible number, indeed. You know, you mentioned in passing eagles, and John and Baronet has an experience relating to eagles. I think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, let's hear that.
Let's hear it.
Good morning, guys. Thanks for the show.
Yeah.
I'm a motorcyclist. I spent a lot of time on my motorcycle, and yesterday I was heading from Eau Claire up towards Rice Lake on US 53, and I didn't see this bird in the ditch. The ditch must have been deep enough that I couldn't see it from the road. And all of a sudden, it comes out of the ditch, heads right for me, and then he was literally belly facing me, and he was so close I could have easily reached out and grabbed his leg. And that's the second time. I had one about 5 years ago, also on Highway 53 up by Solon Springs. That two of them were eating off a carcass on the side of the road.
Right.
I come up with my noisy bike, and they fly off. One takes off to the right into the woods. The other one starts to do that, but turns around, and his talons actually clicked on my windshield on the motorcycle.
That's a close call for both you and the eagle.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, it's scary. They're big birds, you know.
Yeah.
Well, as you said, they're feeding on the carcasses. So fish is the main food during the summertime, but they will scavenge for food that's available, especially the roadkill deer. And a big bird like that does not lift off real quickly. So that's always something to be careful of. And as we talked about red-headed woodpeckers earlier in the program, that's another bird that seems to be a little more vulnerable than other woodpeckers to car collisions. First of all, they're feeding on the ground, so they may be right along the roadside, and they're just slow to take off, unlike some of the other songbirds that just lift up right in front of you and even catch that draft off the vehicle and get blown out of the way. And so some birds are certainly much more vulnerable to collisions with vehicles.
Yeah. John, thank you for calling. Ann in Madison, your turn. Hi, Ann.
Hi. We have a cabin in Endeavor, and we did this year, for the first time in 30 years, we have had a red-headed woodpecker almost every weekend. And he's just delightful to watch. He'll go from tree to tree and kind of in the same areas and peck away. And I don't know what he's getting, but I'm sure it's some kind of bugs. And then we have had the little titmouse. We haven't had any this year yet, but we get them quite regularly. And those are just beautiful with their big eyes.
Oh.
That's a cute little bird. And a close relative to the chickadee. It's the same family. The red-headed woodpecker, as you say, he's hanging around there throughout this time of the year. He's at least a potential nester. So whether he'll successfully find a mate and raise the family is another question. But it sounds like, as you've seen him repeatedly, he's at least settled in here for this summer period and with hopes of mating and nesting. The tufted titmouse is a bird that has been moving north into Wisconsin over the decades. It is a more southerly population, and like chickadees, they're not migratory, and they don't have a real large dispersal area. So when all of a sudden the young are growing up, they may move out of that territory from the adults. They don't tend to move real far, so it's been sort of a slow advance of these birds coming into Wisconsin. There are some places in Wisconsin that have had tufted titmice for over 30 years. Other places, they're a little slow to advance. And I live, as I mentioned, in the northern Kettle Moraine. There's a small population, and I believe our problem is that from the other forested areas, say the southern Wisconsin and the southwest driftless area, where we've got a well-established population of tufted titmice, that open farmland is sort of a barrier for a forest bird. It's difficult for them to be able to jump from forest to forest to advance to those areas. And that may be a little bit of the inhibition then for these birds to advance further north. And of course, our harsher winter may also, in northern Wisconsin, limit eventually. But we'll see how these birds slowly begin to establish in new areas throughout the state. It's been happening for many years now.
Many years. And thank you very much for calling. Bill Volkert, our guest today, as we talk birds and migration with him. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Great to have you along today on WPR News. Larry Mealer here. Just a quick note on Wednesday of this week, among other things, we will be talking with Wisconsin DNR's new secretary, Karen Yun. And I'm kind of looking forward to that. It's the first time that she'll be with us, and looking forward to that conversation. Of course, always look forward to Bill Volkert, and we're talking birds with him, and lots of callers online, lots of emails. So let's go back to the phones and to Jim in rural Stevens Point. Hi, Jim.
Hello, Larry. Boy, I love your program. I particularly like your birding shows. I always learn something. This is my comment portion here, especially the push, for chickadees, not to do that, because I always do that and they come around and I think that's so good, but I've stopped doing that. Anyway, regarding bird strikes on the windows, my wife came up with an ingenious solution. We have a set of French doors out on our deck where she puts the bird feeders, and we would always get a hit every month or so, and it'd be horrible. So we put the stripes on the windows. We tried those ultraviolet stickers, and nothing really seemed to work. But she came up with a kind of like a soccer net built out from like the eaves trough down to the deck with enough room that you could walk out. And she used the bird netting that people put around their berries and such.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't interfere with the view looking out. You can hardly see it. It's almost, kind of invisible. And the birds just bounce off of it like a trampoline, and they don't get hurt. And
good for you.
I thought that was so brilliant. I thought that, maybe some people could utilize that too.
Well, the trick is to make the window more visible to the birds with, of course, not overly obstructing your view or interfering with your view. We put the striping on our windows, and I don't even notice it anymore. When I was up at Hunt Hill doing a workshop up there last week, what they did was to use parachute cord, and they hung that in front of the glass doors and some of the windows. It is a heavier cord, so it doesn't blow around as much in the wind. It'll sway a little bit, but not, say, lift up or get tangled up. And again, it just makes it visible, and they hung it 4 inches apart, so it looks like it's just too narrow to slip between. And so, there's a number of different ways. You've got your little trampoline there to bounce the birds off.
I like that idea.
And as you said, it's a fine webbing that you can see through it easily enough, and makes it safer for the birds. So, there's a lot of different ways to do that, and anything we can do to avoid those window strikes. It's a quick, simple, low-tech fix, but the benefit is tremendous.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing that, Jim.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Appreciate it very much. Lori Anna in Waukesha, we'll go to you now. Hi, Lori.
Hi there, Larry. Just wanted to thank you again for having Bill Volkert on. I did my first bird banding experience with him up in Horicon Marsh about 20 years ago, so I appreciate the work that he's done for a long time here in Wisconsin.
Thank you very much.
So my question is, a couple of times around this time of year, I've seen this bird fly through, and I haven't been able to identify it. I live up near Sussex, have seen it up there, group of 3 or 4 of them. We were down at my daughter's soccer game in Wales last week, and I couldn't identify it with Merlin just because we were at a soccer game. But it's a fully black bird, bigger than, robin or crow size almost, but it has a real striking orange-red beak and orange-red feet. And for the life of me, I can't figure out what it is.
That's
beak and feet. First thing was coming to mind, as you say, larger than a crow. Were you seeing this sitting on the ground or on water or just flying overhead?
Just flying overhead. And the couple of times that we've seen them, it's been in a group of 3 or 4. They did vocalize, but again, I didn't catch it.
They did vocalize, because I was thinking cormorants, which has that orangish bill, very large, dark bird, usually in small flocks, moving overhead, but they don't tend to call very much. Also, the feet are not bright orange. Let me roll that around in my head a little bit, and maybe there's a caller out there that also has a bit of a hint.
Yeah, I'm kind of stumped. Well, I'm not kind of. I am stumped.
Yeah, and part of it is when I catch a bird in flight, sometimes I even have to watch it for a second before it just turns, does something in particular. And the British bird watchers came up with a little bit of a term they call the jizz of the bird. And if you look at them long enough, there's just something about it that is, say, robin-ish about it. It gives it its hint away without being any one particular field mark. And that's oftentimes what we go by. I'm trying to match up some of your field marks that stood out, but I might need a couple other hints as well. But we'll think about it. Maybe another a caller here, a listener will be able to come up with something as well.
Yeah, Lori, thanks.
We got a little time in the program. Let's see if we can come up with that one.
Yeah,
but I appreciate you sharing it.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. Appreciate it. Laura in Madison, your turn.
Hi, Larry. Thank you for taking my call. And Bill, my question for you is arguably agriculture and vegetation is a big reason for bird loss, particularly grassland birds. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering whether or not the incentivization, whether or not incentivizing farmers up and down the Mississippi Flyway, as well as here in Wisconsin, to adopt regenerative practices and maybe land set-asides and habitat islands might be a big part of the solution.
Well, you're absolutely right. There was a program that was much more in effect a number of decades ago called the Conservation Reserve Program, CRP. And it was part of the federal farm bill. It probably is still in there, but I don't know about the, first of all, sales pitch to get people to enroll, the amount of money being put toward it, and the incentives for the farmers to do so. What the intent was, well, we always had price supports because of so much overproduction of certain crops. So we thought, well, if we're paying farmers on price supports and they're tilling somewhat marginal land, and we also have off that land that is somewhat marginal, especially those of steep slopes where you have high erosion of topsoil, why don't we take that out of production and pay them instead, not for the price support, but for conservation? And that was to be put into tall grass. And so Conservation Reserve Program is something like 40 million acres of prairie grasses have been planted throughout the central United States, including into Wisconsin and surrounding states. And what we saw was a direct correlation of grassland birds, for many of the species anyways. They went right up as that habitat was available. And of course, as either the incentives for the program changed or the economics, that all of a sudden the crop prices went up, farmers decided to plow that land and convert it again, the birds have gone down. So, yeah, it's a direct correlation of available habitat. And as you mentioned, the grassland birds, more than any, have shown tremendous declines because so much of what was grassland habitat is under cultivation. And what we find was these are birds that were originally in the prairie grasslands, the native grasslands. Mm-hmm. As we went to dairy farming, originally that was pasturing of cattle, and a lot of those birds were able to move into either the hay fields that we had for crops or the pasture land itself. And these were referred to by the conservationists and ecologists as surrogate grasslands. They're not native grasslands, but they mimic that habitat, and the birds were doing quite well. Well, what's happened again, changes in the farming economy. We've gone to some of the very early ripening crops, the clovers, which are being harvested usually when you get around Memorial Day and first week of June. And this is being harvested while the birds have just settled in, barely found a mate, and begun to nest, and we're mowing that off. And so we're destroying those nests and nesting habitat at that time. And, of course, cattle, rather than allowing them to pasture, we now confine them in large part and bring the food to them by harvesting that and trucking it to some of these confinement areas. So we don't have that acreage available even in, say, the man-managed sort of artificial grassland habitat. And so with that, yeah, there again, we've got less and less available space, and those birds are the ones that are showing some of the greatest pressures.
Laura, thank you very much for calling. Appreciate it. We've got about 40 seconds or so before we take a little break. But Sam emailed to ask, why do terns migrate long distances? They're not insectivores.
Well, what we find is that there's a whole variety of different tern species. We've got Wisconsin Forster's tern, common tern, black tern, and occasionally Arctic tern, which really be a stray in Wisconsin. They're coming up to coastal areas more. And when you've got these birds that are feeding somewhat similarly and spreading out for nesting, they've got to work around the others. So the Arctic tern has got to go much further north to nest, so it's not competing with the foresters and the black tern and common tern. And of course, for wintertime, they're looking for food. He works around those others. And so we find this is very typical of birds that a good example are the two species of kinglets. The golden crown kinglet is somewhat of a short distance migrant going to the boreal forest and just say south of Wisconsin. The ruby crown kinglet has got to go much further north to nest and fly further south to avoid competition.
Our guest today, Bill Volkert, and Bill's going to be with us for the next full hour. So we're looking forward to that as well, and hope you'll join in with your own questions. Number's 800-642-1234. Email to talk@wpr.org. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. We're getting a birding update from our regular guest, Bill Volkert. Larry Mealer here. Thanks for joining us on WPR News. Bill, of course, a retired wildlife DNR educator and naturalist. He's been watching birds for well over 40 years. So, taking your questions, what do you want to know about maybe birds you're seeing in your area, or about feeding birds, or maybe bird songs? Give us a call. The number's 800-642-1234, or send an email to talk@wpr.org. And let's take a call from Bob in Door County next. Hi, Bob.
Yes, this is Bob. I live in Door County, about 10 miles north of the Big Bay Bridge. And I've got several feeding stations on my property. And fortunately, I get all the songbirds, the colorful songbirds. But this year I noticed that their color seems a lot more intense. The orange on the orioles is brilliant, as well as the blue on the indigo buntings, and every other one, the rose-beaks, rose-breasted grosbeaks, and so forth. I'm just wondering what's going on.
I don't know if I've really noticed that they're more brilliant than most years. I think part of it is I just haven't seen them for about 9 months. So they really are striking birds, and especially in really good sunlight. Indigo bunting, of course, the blue is a reflected color, so it really depends on the angle of the sunlight. If they're backlit, they're going to look black. If they're side lit, it may look like a very dark blue. If the light hits it just right, they're just electric. And sometimes it can be almost too intense. It gets a little washed out on it. So I really don't know if it's just your perception that you're enjoying those brilliant, intense colors of the birds, and something that you just haven't seen all along. To me, yes, they are certainly striking colors, but I haven't noticed that it's any more so than in most years. One thing about bird plumages and the colors of the breeding males, one thing that I've noticed, it's not just the intensity of the color, but juxtaposition of color. So in other words, you get that brilliant deep orange of an oriole. That is a striking color, but put that right next to a jet black. And that's what really makes it stand out. And this is what we see in a lot of birds, is that those colors, it's that combination of colors, especially in that family of warblers, you'll notice it. It's not just a golden yellow, but you put black and then white right next to that. And they just seem to really balance and highlight. And it's wonderful how nature has designed them with such brilliant and intense colors. The one thing also in terms of, say, conservation of birds and some of the concerns we have is that you'll notice is with orioles, there is a first-year plumage for the males. And also, since I do bird banding, I have these birds in the little birds in the hand, even among the warblers. And many bird watchers, if you get a close look, you'll notice that the young males do not yet have the full intense colors. So one of the concerns for these birds is they're long-distance migrants. They're wintering all the way down into Central America, some of them into Northern South America. So we're talking about long flights. They raise a family here. The young have got to make it all the way to the wintering ground, survive, come all the way back here again, and now the males have not achieved yet that full, intense color, and are usually not successful in attaining a mate. So what you have is these birds are probably sexually mature and are capable of nesting, but they're not good in competing for the prime breeding area. They're pushed off to the side. They've got sort of the marginal habitat areas. They may sing away all summer long and are just not attracting birds, which means a mate. So they've got to go all the way south and now the next year come back and survive 2 full journeys before they even have a chance of a successful breeding. So what we find is that oftentimes for many of these birds, it requires 2 years to get that full color. And interesting also is that in nature, certainly we're attracted to that beauty of the birds, but the females seem to select for that as well. There seems to be an actual recognition of attractiveness, of a sense of fitness of these birds, and maybe even appreciation for the beauty of these males and look for them. And so it certainly makes them the more successful. And I guess if I could steal a line from even ZZ Top, even they would say, because every girl goes crazy about a sharp-dressed man. So even among the birds, it's those that are the more mature and intense plumages are certainly the more successful in at least attracting a mate. And then, of course, the chance of being able to successfully raise young.
And that may be why Bob is seeing maybe the more mature this year versions.
And what you're going to notice is even among that, I'm sure that there are a few individuals that just have even more just brilliant orange, almost electric orange or hot reddish colors like in scarlet tanagers. They really stand out.
Yeah.
A few individuals may just show those colors even more than others.
Yeah. Bob, thank you so much for calling. As long as we're talking about color, let's turn to the songs of songbirds. And I've got a couple, 3 maybe that we could go through. One, the yellow warbler. Let's hear that, and then have you comment, and then we'll hear it once more.
Notice there's 2 parts to the song, a couple of notes and then a little warble at the end. And most bird watchers use a little phrase of sweet, 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 I'm so sweet, or sweet, 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 very, very sweet. There are little variations of the song, and occasionally we'll hear what bird watchers refer to as an alternate song. He'll start out with a sweet, 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 and then sort of slur off a little bit. But it's that introduction, that sweet, 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 I'm so sweet.
Let's see if we can hear it again. Yeah. Yeah.
You hear that in there?
Yeah.
That's a way to remember it, because these are voices of these birds that we can't even imitate. So how do you get that to register in your head, and how do you learn that? And these little phrases, these little mnemonics are oftentimes quite helpful. Another one is the common yellowthroat, another one of our warblers. See if Jeff can find that for us. Witchity, witchity, witchity.
Yeah, witchity,
witchity, witchity, or some people say Wichita, Wichita. And both of these warblers are found down in the wetter areas. So yellow warblers usually in lowland brush or forest edge. They're not a deep forest bird. And the yellowthroat is actually in the wetlands, edges of cattails and some of the shrub card areas, the willow stands. And so these are birds that are going to be hiding in the thickets. And they're only 4 inches long, so hard to get a look at, especially now that the leaves are out full and they're starting to hunker down for nesting. But the voices really carry. So if we can listen again. Witchity, witchity, witchity.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go.
Very, very
nice way to remember
cool.
that one.
All right. So a couple more songs. Sue in Menominee, Michigan has a question that doesn't have anything to do with songs, but let's go there anyway. Hi,
it's
Sue.
all about birds.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
We have about 80 acres, and 40 back we have a big field, and my husband built a raised blind that he hasn't used for a long time. And it's got like stairs up to it, like with a handrail. So I noticed one day a big bird flew out of it. So being curious, I ended up a few days later creeping up the stairs and peeking in,
Mm-hmm.
and there's two eggs. And they're just on the floor. It's a wooden floor, just on the floor. And I've seen the mother now several times. She's huge. She looks like she's an eagle that hasn't changed to white yet.
Turkey vulture.
And well, she doesn't have any red on her, so it could be. But I'm worried, should I protect the door? The door's just open. Should I protect anything when these chicks hatch, or just leave her be because she picked that spot?
Yeah, just leave them be. They probably, obviously found it as being a suitable area. Turkey vultures tend to nest on the ground. They don't really build a nest. So in the Baraboo Hills, they'll use little caves there and ledges. They may nest in a hollow log. And yeah, the deer stands and blinds, these are something that they've also taken to. It's a nice little protected area from the weather, and they don't have to do any real work. And bald eagles really make the large stick nests, so they're going to build their own nest. So as you're talking about it being in a blind, first thought that came to me as you're describing, I was thinking, this sounds like turkey vulture nest. Yeah, you want to give them a little bit of space. Also, just be aware that they do have an interesting way of defending themselves. So if you do get up there as adults, as the young get a little bit larger, they will hiss at you and they may try to vomit. And I think it's very effective. You've already eaten from a dead carcass and then it's partially digested. That'll keep most people away.
Oh, boy. Stu, there you go. Thank you.
But they play an important role out there. That is the
Yeah.
cleanup crew of nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for calling. You can join in too, 800-642-1234, or email to talk@wpr.org. Matt in Dunbar has a question or comment. Let's go there. Hi, Matt.
Hi, Larry. Glad to have me on. I have a question. I've moved up here in a tiny house trailer, and the whippoorwills really are something else. Maybe you can talk about them a little bit more, but my questions or observations are they start calling sometimes, and they don't stop. They call, a call every second, and they'll go on for minutes. I had some that I think it's the same bird going on for hours and hours, and if you consider a call every second, that's 3,000 calls an hour. It's kind of crazy. And I do notice sometimes there's a difference. I saw one that seemed like a mature bird, had a very full call, and then some of the younger ones don't seem quite as proficient in their whippoorwill isn't as precise. Can you talk about them a little bit and what they eat and the night birds that they are?
Yeah, whippoorwills are related to another bird that we'll see migrating through right now, which is the common nighthawk. They're in a family that is called the nightjars. Another old name is goatsucker, and there was an old myth of it that they thought that they actually were milking goats at night. I have no clue where that ever came from. But anyway, nightjar is probably a pretty good name because they've got a tiny little beak, but if you ever see them open their mouth, it is like a big bucket, and they're scooping up big insects, moths, beetles, anything else they're picking up out of there in the evening sky. So they are an aerial insectivore, so they're eating insects, but these are the flying insects that they're scooping out of the air. And that bill is just used for basically swallowing the very large insects. They also have they look like whiskers, but it's a true modified feather. And this helps to sort of funnel the food in. They kind of feel, say, if you got a big moth in front of you, you can kind of turn your head quickly and zero in on that thing as a food. They nest on the ground, so they're looking for a camouflaged area. And of course, here's a bird that is so highly camouflaged. If it was sitting on dry leaves in front of you, you'd have a hard time actually sighting that bird. And here's the problem. How do you attract the mates when you're that well camouflaged and so hidden? By voice. So that carries for a long distance. And if they continue to sing like that, the question I have is, it's simply part of maintaining that pair bond with the mate, or are they unsuccessful in actually attracting a mate and continuing to sing on? And that's always my concern is, yes, these birds are present, but are they actually nesting and are they raising any young? And that's what we're always hoping for. So, yeah, very vocal, and they will go on and on all night. It's just a beautiful song for them, and unfortunately has been lost from so much of our forests across Wisconsin. You're lucky to have them in your area.
Yeah, we have an eastern whippoorwill, I think, that Jeff's got. Let's hear that.
Just on and on and on. And you can see where he got the name, whippoorwill. He says his own name. So as we have these phrases to remember bird songs, many of birds were actually named by the songs. Blue jay, the J sound. We've got chickadee, peewee, phoebe, some of the flycatchers. These were they're just so diagnostic of the sound that they make that we actually just gave them that name.
Matt, thank you very much for calling. Appreciate your call. Bill Volkert, our guest today. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Great to have you along today as we talk birds with Bill Volkert, retired wildlife educator and a naturalist. Great to have him with us. Susie in Manitowoc has a question for you, Bill. Let's go there.
Hi. It's not a question. It's just a happy comment. We have 2 winterberry shrubs in our backyard, and they've gotten to be a pretty good size. They bloomed better this year than they ever have. We are just waiting for those buds to turn into berries because the robins come and feast on those berries, and they strip those bushes within a matter of few days. The bushes aren't strong enough to really support their weight that much, so they'll stand on the ground and jump up and catch the winterberries. It is a blast. So I don't get anything done those days when they're there.
Oh, that's great, Susie. Thanks for calling.
Obviously a very attractive food source for them. I see the same thing in late summer with gray dogwood. They produce a clumps of white berries, and the robins, some of the migrant thrushes, and a variety of other songbirds will come in and gobble those up. They don't last all that long. So, yeah, the seasonally available food and obviously very attractive for them.
Thank you, Susie, for calling. Anna Marie in South Milwaukee will give you a chance to join in. Hi, Anna.
Hello. I do a lot of birding in May because, living on Lake Michigan, on the flyway, we get really cool stuff coming through. So last May I was, warblers, I find them kind of irritating because they are so fast, so tiny. You get them in your binocs for a second and they're gone.
Well, they are challenging, no doubt.
My goodness. So this morning, though, I had a parula, and it was right at my eye level. It was just in a little shrub, super close. I could have reached out and touched it, and it was preening. It was sticking its little beak all around. It was a beautiful morning, and it was enjoying so much. And so I was just sitting there enchanted watching this bird, and then all of a sudden it zipped around. It was like bent in half with its beak all the way in its tail feathers, and it zipped around and caught a little tiny black fly, and I laughed because it was so amazing, and I just wondered, how did it know that thing was all the way around the other side of its body? My friend said maybe it was a he, maybe he could hear it.
Possibly hearing it, and birds also have their eyes more on the side of the head, so they've got a much broader peripheral vision than we do. And so they do certainly feed by sight. And you also have to keep in mind that birds have a much faster reflex time than we do. So their ability to be able to move, snap things up, and respond to things is much quicker than us.
And we have a song of the parula. Let's listen in. That's a cool sound.
So very fast, a little trill to it, and it rises up with a little accent at the end. There's a number of variations on that call, but not so much a phrase, but the way to think of it, it seems to have this ascending chatter. Some people describe it like a zipper. Zzz.
Oh.
What was interesting with her sighting is she said it was sitting in a bush right in front of her. That's not typical of the northern parula. It's actually a treetop bird. Now, they will come down to feed in some of the lower parts of the trees and shrubs on occasion, but this is a bird that's usually way at the tops of the trees, and especially now that the leaves are full out, it's a bird you really have to listen for, because he's going to be hard to see when he's way up in the upper canopy of the tree and hidden up there. So we oftentimes listen for these birds. And of course, when we do the breeding bird surveys, so much of that is done by song or by ear. Mm-hmm. And this is why when we actually do summer surveys, we're looking for experienced birders who've got a good working knowledge of bird songs so that we can get a good census. And of course, if you have enough people out there, there's always a little bit of what we call observer bias. There are some people who've got a little more acute hearing and much more experience to be able to differentiate all the different birds. And this is how we're keeping sort of that pulse on the bird populations. So when we do our breeding bird surveys, in other words, trying to count the nesting birds, as was just mentioned, May is an exciting time during the migration. It's wonderful, but it's not a good indicator of bird populations. Every year, in fact, every day can be different. We have had some years where the warblers are held back in, say, southern Illinois and in some of the forests just south of Wisconsin because of north winds and difficult flying conditions, and then all of a sudden a strong front, and they seem to just overshoot southern Wisconsin to make up for lost time. We also have years where it starts to warm up already in late May or late April and early May, and the leaves are coming out before these little 4-inch birds arrive, which means they're getting harder and harder to see out there. And just, as these birds are moving north, whether they're stopping over right in our favorite little place, our backyard, a local park or nature center, and they're all there in good numbers for us to see, or if they're maybe taking a different course or overshooting, each year is a little different. So we're really looking at summer as the best census time because they've settled down. And so when we conduct a breeding bird survey for southern Wisconsin, we begin 1st of June. So we assume right now that in almost any average year, all of the migrants should be through so that every bird we see or hear right now should be here for nesting. Northern Wisconsin, we wait until June 15th. The migration is a little lower, still some birds hanging out and waiting to get to Canada. So now we've got a number of different protocols or techniques that we use in trying to monitor birds. One is just simply a point count. Go to one area, go out there and just stop, watch and listen, and make a note of every bird that's detected. The breeding bird survey has been long-standing. That's been going on since 1966. It's done every year across the United States. These are roadside surveys. So we look for rural roads where we've got a roadside passing through good habitat. It's a 25-mile stretch of road, and the observer stops every half mile. So we start a half hour before sunrise. First birds are already singing away, and you stop for 3 minutes. Note everything at each of the stops. So you have 50 stops along that route. Well, in a warm day, as you get toward the latter part of it, it's getting late in the morning over all that period, and some birds may stop singing, so we always do it twice. If your route is from north to south or east to west, you go from one side to the next, and you repeat it again a few days later, going the opposite way, so you catch the early morning singing birds on that route, and then we average out what we've heard.
Very interesting.
We just actually designed a whole new survey for the northern kettle moraine. And this is very exciting for us because we actually have everybody doing it just on a cell phone. My friend Jeff Bauman, who's also one of the field trip leaders for the State Ornithological Society, he is quite the computer whiz. So he laid out the pins on Google Maps every 200 yards. We followed the Ice Age Trail, and we also had roadside surveys. And we listened for 10 minutes, really gave a chance for some very thorough survey. And where the breeding bird surveys, the standard ones in Wisconsin, if you have 50 stops, there's about 90 survey routes in Wisconsin. There's 450 listening points throughout the state. We had over 500 listening points just in the northern Kettle Moraine. Very intense, and it's what I refer to as a high-resolution bird survey, and we're trying to get really solid baseline of the birds in that area. And the results were really quite astounding. I've been living there for over 40 years, and I did not realize there were that many scarlet tanagers. We had 147 singing males there.
Wow.
And so what we're trying to do is Jeff and I both, as we talked about the birds of the area, we both remember a number of years ago, let's say 25 years ago, where there were more oven birds than now. But we have no actual data. It's just anecdotal. It's like, yeah, both of us, we've been watching birds a long time. We used to detect more than now, but we don't know the rate of change. So this is why these surveys, we're trying to, at this point in time, get a really good baseline. How many are there at this point? And then we're going to try to repeat this every 5 years so we can look for very short-term changes of birds. And this may actually be now a model that can be used very intensively on other properties across the U.S.
That's very, very cool. Nancy emailed to say they say there is what seems to be a young sparrow in their yard. It's greenish with distinct white patches on its wings. It doesn't fly like a warbler. Is it a sparrow or something else?
Greenish white patches.
Greenish white with distinct white patches on its wings.
She's describing a patch rather than a wing bar. And if she's talking about a small bird, warbler or a sparrow-like, I'll tell you what comes to my mind is female black-throated blue warbler. The male is a deep, kind of a deeper cerulean, almost navy blue with intense black. The female is sort of a greenish wash to it, greenish gray. And both male and female have just this little square of white on the wing. And that's a very diagnostic field mark for that bird. Just one probability, just from her description of it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we take a look at the size of the bird, we look at the shape of the bill, and we look at a variety of different field marks, not just the colors of the bird, its behavior, and so forth. This is usually what you need to put it all together. But that would be my first guess, just from my first impression.
Guess. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Elaine and Madison emailed to say they were in Vilas County in May and were amazed at how many red-winged blackbirds were collecting along the shore of a lake in Presque Isle. In her 30 years of visiting the area, doesn't remember seeing such huge numbers of them and wondering why they're there now. Are they still moving north?
It sounds to me like that these are birds that are still in flocks and are still dispersing for further north, because once the males settle in for nesting, a very typical view would be get out to a cattail marsh where you see red-winged blackbirds and you'll see a male sitting on top and they're posted out there and they're evenly spread more or less across that because they're very territorial. When they're grouped together like that, that's still a flock. These are non-breeding birds or migrating birds. So it sounds to me like these are late migrants still moving through. And here also you've got birds that require 2 years to get a full adult plumage. You may also have some of the lingering late migrants as the first-year birds.
I'm not sure that Jeff has this up from our emails, but Lori in Douglas County emailed to say she and her husband considered themselves recreational birders, someplace in between novice and experts. They call themselves noverts.
I like that.
Lori said they heard this call in their yard this weekend and they were stumped and wondering if you could please help. Let's listen. You know what it sounds like? It sounds
like a cell phone.
It sounds like my daughter's phone ring.
Yeah. I do not recognize that as anything
it really
typical.
Sounds like my daughter's phone ring when somebody's calling her.
Yeah, that almost sounds a little bit artificial. It certainly is nothing typical. I will admit that I've been listening to bird songs for over 40 years, and still every year I will hear something new out of a bird. So there may be something else out there, but that does not ring a bell of anything. And I don't even know if Merlin could pick that up or match it with anything.
It rings the Verizon bell to me.
Yeah, that's almost what it sounds like. Sounds like something electronic.
Laura in Madison, it's your turn. Hi, Laura.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
Well, I'm just wondering if whooping cranes are still on the earth.
Yes, they are. We have two main populations, which is the original wild migratory population that winters along the Texas coast, especially the Aransas National Wildlife Refuge, and nests in west central Canada, an area known as Wood Buffalo National Park. That is the main migratory flock, and because we literally had all of our eggs in one basket, so to speak, we had the entire world population in one migratory flock. The real concern was if we had oil spill, disease outbreak, some disaster right among that concentrated one group of birds. So for many years, we've been, of course, starting a second flock, and the successful one's been in Wisconsin. And we still are rearing those birds. The eggs are collected from the International Crane Foundation, and I believe it's the National Zoo, the captive flocks there. And they are then hand-reared. All the people are in isolation. And originally this was where we trained the birds to learn a new migration route behind the ultralight, the Operation Migration, which made big news many years ago. Now they've learned it, and we basically are doing what we call the fall-autumn release. In other words, the young ones are raised in isolation until they're big enough to be pretty well on their own. They're then taken out where there are other whooping cranes. They just associate with them, and they'll teach them the migratory route. And so, yes, we continue to try to bolster that population. The entire world population is barely 700 birds or so. So it has certainly increased from where it used to be. Originally, it was down to, they could only count 15 birds in the entire world.
Wow.
And so we have been very successful, but that was in the 1940s. So we're looking at 80 years of conservation efforts to try to restore that population. And so they are very slow because they don't mature until they're several years old, and then usually successfully only raise one young. So it's an incredibly slow recovery, but we're much farther ahead than we used to be, and Wisconsin is critical to that recovery effort.
Let's go to Pete in Madison. Pete, hello. Thank you for calling, and what's on your mind? Pete, are you there?
Yep.
Oh.
Where's my phone? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Here.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call. My question pertains to owls.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fascinated by owls, and I'd like to be able to encourage owls to come into my yard, although I live in a residential area in Westmoreland in the city of Madison, and I've heard about owl houses. Can you comment at all?
Well, the barred owl will occasionally use a box, or also the little screech owl. So they are cavity nesters. They don't make their own nest. Great horned owl may use a very large cavity or an old red-tailed hawk or crow nest. So in other words, they don't build their own nest. They're looking for something that's available. And the little screech owl, we've had them in wood duck boxes. That's not unusual for them. If you go on internet, you can search for plans for especially the screech owl, probably the most common and widespread one that you can likely attract in, say, the urban suburban area. And, the owls themselves are very secretive, of course. They're out only in the evening time, so it makes them more difficult to detect. So that you may have more around the area than you realize, which would probably be one family, because they do use rather large territories. But probably the best chance would be to try a box. Just have to watch that the squirrels aren't in there beforehand. And you also will see that the owls will occasionally use this outside of the breeding season as just a roost site. So oftentimes, say in the fall and wintertime, we'll have little screech owls go into wood duck boxes just because it's a nice sheltered place to get out of the weather during the daytime.
Yeah, there you go, Pete. Thank you for calling. Jean in Superior, your turn. Hi, Jean.
Hi, Larry. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I have a question. I moved to Superior about a year ago from Polk County. I had tons of, feeders out. But here I'm having trouble with grackles. And they just decimate the feeders and they chase away all the other birds. I was wondering if there was something I could do about that.
Yeah, grackles can be pretty aggressive and certainly have one heck of an appetite. It's hard to say right now. You may just have still some migrants, especially in northern Wisconsin, that far northern portion of the county. If you just shut your feeder down, maybe they'll disperse for a little while. That's one thing. If you've got local nesting birds, well, they're just going to keep finding. I've got them in my neighborhood. Yeah, they hit my feeders pretty hard too. That and some of the red-winged blackbirds are coming up from the marsh and feeding. I try to keep up with them a little bit, their appetite. Fortunately, other birds are taking turns and taking advantage of it. But yeah, you might want to just save yourself a little bit of food and some time right now. Just shut the feeder down, let those grackles disperse, and maybe start up again in another week or so. See if that doesn't solve it. So it's hard to say whether these are birds that are passing through and just found your feeding station and let them disperse, or whether you've got a resident pair that you're going to have around all summer long, or more than a resident pair, a little resident population that might be hitting those feeders. And yeah, some of those birds, they can really make some pigs of themselves. They've got quite the appetite, and it can be quite aggressive around a feeder. And so, yeah, you can see them clean it out pretty quickly.
Thank you, Gene. Thanks for calling. Jim in Pewaukee, your turn. Hi, Jim.
Hi, thanks. I'm calling. I've got hummingbird feeders different places around the house for over 10 years. When my grandchildren were little, I had a clipboard, and they would write down what time, whether it was a male or a female, keep track of the hummingbirds coming. But
oh, great. Good exercise.
Well, and this year, I had a female build a nest in my locust right off my family room window. It's about 10 feet out. And from inside the house with binoculars, I can keep an eye on her.
Oh, that's an amazing opportunity, yeah.
I believe she just laid her eggs yesterday and the day before.
Mm-hmm.
I Googled behavior, and it said they do a wiggle and dance kind of thing, and she was doing that. I was wondering if there's anything else that I could be watching for as time progressed with the hatching and the babies and the teaching them to fly, and what you could advise me on.
Well, the incubation period is less than 2 weeks for hummingbirds. And for most birds, the amount of time of incubating the egg is equal to the fledging period or close to it. So in other words, it'd be about 2 weeks or less than that of actually sitting on the eggs, a week and a half, maybe even a little more than that. And then about equal time for the young to fully develop in the nest before they fledge. And then the parents will be caring for them a little bit outside of the nest for a while until they're independent and on their own. But yeah, what a rare opportunity to actually watch them build the nest and be able to observe them like that, because those little nests, those are hard to find in the first place. Yeah. And I've watched the hummingbirds around my place, and I've tried to watch which direction they're flying in to see if I can find a nest. It's a hard one to locate.
Yeah.
So good for you.
Yeah, good for you. I had a nest one house ago. It was really interesting to see the nest and then to observe the bird.
And a follow-up comment about the a person who had the grackle problem. Another suggestion is maybe some alternate foods. Shift over to the thistle seed for now for the finches, and your hummingbird feeders for the orioles, the hummingbirds, and so forth. Try to avoid the suet, which grackles will go to, and also the big sunflower seeds. So you try a little bit of alternate food for a few of the other birds and see what happens.
Yeah, that's good advice as well. Bill Volkert, our guest. I'm Larry Mealer for WPR News. Tomorrow on the show, we'll talk to astronomy enthusiast Paul Kinzer about what to look for in the night sky. And then we'll visit the small town of Oconto to take a look at Oconto Copperfest. And then we'll talk about Wisconsin tourism. So that's all coming up tomorrow. And then Wednesday, just a quick reminder, at 12:30 on Wednesday, WDNR Secretary Karen Young will join us to talk about her new role and what we're looking forward to in the way of issues with the DNR and opportunities as well. So lots there. Jackie in Chippewa Falls has something for us. Let's go there. Hi, Jackie.
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I was just wondering, the woman who had the bird sound that you thought sounded like a cell phone, could that be a chipping sparrow?
Chipping sparrow, it has that very fast call. It's a very sharp, accented little series of chips. This didn't quite sound like it to me. Of course, a recorded sound and then playing it back through headphones, it may not always hear some of the nuances of it. If we could listen to chipping sparrow, you'll hear it. It is that, I think well-named bird. It is this really rapid series of chips. The rate of singing can vary between individuals, and even a single bird may sing slower or a little faster.
Yeah. And
well, thank you for that clarification. And I was going to let you know as well that we do have tufted titmice here in Chippewa Falls pretty much year-round.
You see, the western part of the state, they seem, if you draw a line, it's kind of diagonal across the state. They've really advanced north along the Mississippi River corridor and out of that driftless area. So, say Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire area, they're found that far north in western Wisconsin. Where in the east, they're not quite to that latitude. And as I said, I think part of it is just we're surrounded by so much farmland. It's hard to make that jump for a forest bird to get much further north. But it has been a slow advance over the decades.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the comments there. Nathan in Eau Claire emailed to say the caller who described the small heron in their tree mentioned it was black and gray and active at dusk. Nathan thinks it's a black-crowned night heron, not a green heron.
Black-crowned night heron is another possibility. They're semi-colonial or colonial nesting birds, so they're usually going to be found in larger groups rather than individuals. So green heron is more of a solitary nester or very loose colonies in good habitat. We actually have very few nesting colonies of black-crowned night herons in Wisconsin. We're at the northern edge of their range for one. And so Green Bay, Horicon Marsh, there's a few colonies there, but I would not expect a single solitary nesting bird. Not to say it's unheard of or impossible, but they tend to be more colonial nesters compared to, say, the green heron. But always a possibility, yep.
Yeah. Denise in Stoughton, your turn. Hi, Denise.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. So we used to live out in the Oregon area, out in the country, fairly heavily wooded area with farm fields surrounding us. And in the springtime, we'd get all the migratory, beautiful songbirds, as you were talking about, red-breasted grosbeak, tanagers, and orioles, and all those good things, hummingbirds. And then a couple months ago, we moved out into Stoughton in a new development that was a farm field. And so we don't have all those nice birds anymore. I did put out a feeder, and I mostly get blackbirds and white red-winged blackbirds and occasional goldfinch. We did this weekend get a hummingbird at our feeder, and I'm just wondering what I can do to try to attract some of those birds back again.
Well, some of the most important things that we can do is, as I mentioned, bird-safe glass, certainly, to avoid the collisions and hazards with our windows. The other one is landscaping. And you mentioned it was a newer development, newer neighborhood. And the problem here is that when we look at bird habitat, like for any wildlife, habitat is the food, water, and shelter. So we can put out bird baths, have some food, water available. We can have a variety of different feeders. which can be food, but we need the shelter. They need a place to be safe. And your landscaping is going to be the most important thing, especially in these new developments. Something that was farmland, wide open. You're going to have to start planting some trees, some shrubs, some thickets. And this is really something extremely valuable that any homeowner can do, is to devote a little bit of a corner of your backyard to wildlife, a pollinator garden, some wildflowers, some shrubs and thickets. These are the places that birds need to hide, to rest, to feel safe, and to build a nest. A study that was done back in the about the 1940s or 50s, as I recall, it was looking at a white-throated sparrow, a bird that just loves the thick shrubs, and you always find them in these real dense thickets. They had a captive bird, and in a little cage, they took little sticks, kind of like chopsticks, and they put them all vertically. The bird sort of hopped around and didn't pay much attention. Then they moved them all vertically. The bird would hop around or horizontally, and the bird would hop around, perch on him, back and forth, didn't pay much attention. As soon as they randomly crisscrossed, the bird just dove right into it. That was the visual cue as the safe place for these birds to go to. That's what shrubs do. And so that tangle of some shrubbery, something like that, is really going to be important. So if you could plant some native shrubs, and do stick with the natives, ask your nursery for that, because they're also not only good climate hardy and adapted to our soils, but they also are something that the native insects depend on, which is the food. And we could get into a little more of that some other time, that the invasives and non-natives do not attract our native insects. They're not adapted to it. And I always remind homeowners that, I think for most of us, a little bit of a lawn area right in front for some open space, recreation is one thing. But I think for most of us, the only time we visit the far corner of our yard is with the lawnmower.
Yeah.
We're not using it anyway. Let's devote that to the birds. And if everybody were to give a couple hundred square feet to the wildlife, imagine what that could add up in a neighborhood. It's the long-term plan. Start planting now and give it some time to mature, but it certainly will pay off in the long run by creating much more bird-friendly habitat. And there are a number of bird books out there on backyard landscaping and making your backyard more bird-friendly. And certainly I would advise you, if you need to take a look for some of those. One of our Wisconsin authors, Mariette Nowak, did a wonderful book on making your backyard more bird-friendly. There's a lot of good aids out there, but anything you can do to landscape it is certainly going to benefit, and it's going to be the third critical component to habitat.
And there's a UW Extension publication, I'm thinking back now, called Landscape Plants That Attract Birds.
Yes, there's a number of great sources out there that help the landowner, and now's the time to get started.
Thank you very much for calling. Appreciate your call. Lisa in Cheeseburg emailed to ask are there bobwhite quails in Vernon County anymore?
Oh, boy. That was an area where I could still find them. Vernon, Crawford County, going out to Wyalusing Park. There was like a small relic population out that way. I don't know what still persists. Back in the 1980s, 90s, DNR was working in Richland County with landowners trying to create habitat for bobwhite quail. We're at the far northern edge of their range to begin with. It was a bird of what we call the coveys, the little flocks were in these thickets. So again, when farmland was smaller, where we had the rotated crops, the hay fields along with the row crops, and then the hedgerows in between, that provided the feeding areas and the nesting sites and escape cover for bobwhite quail. They responded very well to that habitat. And of course, things have changed. We got rid of the hedgerows. Farm fields increased in size along with as the machinery made that possible. And that changed the character of our land, making it less suitable for that bird. There are certainly still good populations south of Wisconsin. And I know Georgia in particular has been working very intensively on research for many decades on bobwhite quail. Wisconsin, that was that relic population that I used to find out there in that area, Crawford, Vernon, and I don't even know what remains of that anymore.
We had, when I was thinking back to when I was a kid, we on a farm in Dane County, and we had a population of bobwhite quail there. But that was a long time ago.
And that also coincides with the successful introduction of pheasants back in the 40s to the 60s. They did quite well in that farm mosaic at that time, where now it's basically they're farm raised and released for hunting purposes with very little natural reproduction. So, yeah, it's the changes of the land. And, you know, when we talk about the birds and some of the conservation challenges we face right now, what we find is that, like we talked earlier about the Conservation Reserve Program with the fallowed grasslands for birds, those grassland birds responded accordingly. And it's a matter of how we treat the land. There's 11,000 species of birds on this planet, and I'm of the feeling that if we were to make it enough of a priority, we could probably save almost every bird on this planet. Nature always gave them a place, and all we need to do is the same. But there has to be that will, starting individually, that we make something available for birds and care for them, and then also something to help push our governments to make priorities in conservation so that we actually try to reverse these declines.
And on that note, Bill, it's been a great 2 hours.
Well, my pleasure.
You.
Thanks so much. I will mention real quickly that I do speak around the state, and I am available for speaking to groups. If they want to go to my website, billvolkert.com, I'd be glad to share more information on birds with anyone.
Bill Volkert, our guest, thanks so much to him, and thanks to you for listening, and a big thanks to our producers, Clara Neipert, Joel Patnott, our technical directors, Jeff Robbins did a great job today. Lee Rayburn. Our executive producers, Jill Nadeau. I'm Larry Mueller. And stay with us. Lots more in store here on WPR News.